They call it cold chain pharmaceutical logistics. I call it babysitting 3 million vials of insulin, 600 pallets of chemotherapy drugs, and 40 transplant organs a month. All of it moving through refrigerated trucks at exactly 36 degrees Fahrenheit across a country that doesn't care how it happens, only that it does. My name is Dana. For 19 years, I have been the invisible nervous system holding Meridian RX distribution together. You don't know me, but if your grandmother's heart medication showed up on time, if the flu vaccine made it to your kid's pediatrician in October instead of February, if a kidney flew from Cleveland to Tucson and arrived cold enough to save somebody's life, that was me. That was my phone, my spreadsheets, my 3 a.m. wake-up calls to truckers I trust more than most of my own family. My official title is Senior Director of Vendor Relations and Contract Continuity, which is corporate speak for the woman who knows exactly which refrigerated carrier will drive through an ice storm because she covered his daughter's insurance deductible in 2011, and which customs broker owes her a favor so large he'd clear a shipment of live scorpions if she asked nicely. I don't have a corner office. I have a windowless room on the third floor that smells like burnt coffee and cardboard, wedged between the server closet and the supply cabinet. And I like it there. The quiet lets me hear the hum of the machine. I know when a snowstorm in Denver is going to blow a 3-day hole in the diabetes supply chain to Salt Lake City before the Weather Service even upgrades the warning. I know which trucking outfits are quietly overbilling us on mileage and which ones will turn around at midnight and drive 400 miles because they owe me one from the blizzard of 2019. But before I tell you how I put a $3 billion company into a coma with a single email, I need you to understand something. I never wanted to be the villain of this story. I just wanted to keep the medicine cold and the trucks moving. That was the whole job. Real quick, before we get into the part where I dismantle a pharmaceutical empire from a diner booth with a laptop and a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a tailpipe, if you're the kind of person who enjoys watching an arrogant Nepo baby get exactly what's coming to him in extremely slow, extremely satisfying motion, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps. The algorithm rewards people who like a good corporate bloodbath, and honestly, so do I. All right, back to the wreckage. It started, as these things always do, with a man riding off into a very expensive sunset. Old man Whitfield, Roger Whitfield, the founder, didn't die. He did something almost worse for the rest of us. He retired to a lake house in northern Michigan with a boat he named after his late wife and absolutely no interest in ever picking up a phone again. Roger was a hard man. He built Meridian out of 2 delivery vans and a fax machine in 1987, and by the time I met him, he could look at a shipping manifest and tell you within $400 what a lane was supposed to cost. He didn't say thank you often, and when he did, it landed like a gunshot because it was so rare. But he understood the business down in his bones, and he respected the people who understood it with him. We had an arrangement. I kept the trucks rolling and the temperature logs clean, and he kept my paycheck direct deposited on the 15th like clockwork for 19 years. That was the whole relationship. It worked. Then came Chase. Chase Whitfield, 31 years old, an MBA from a business school that had a building named after his father because his father wrote the check that got the building built. Teeth so aggressively whitened they looked like they came with their own dental warranty. He walked into the CEO's office in a suit that cost more than my Honda Accord, trailing a cologne cloud so thick it triggered the fire alarm on the 4th floor twice in his first month. And somehow, despite not being able to tell you the difference between a bill of lading and a grocery list, he was suddenly captain of a ship that moved life-saving medication to 41 states. His first week, he ripped out the break room's ancient Bunn coffee maker and replaced it with a $600 nitro cold brew tap. His second week, he laid off the entire third shift janitorial staff to streamline vendor overlap, which in practice meant the bathrooms on the warehouse floor were unusable by Thursday, and the temperature-controlled storage room started smelling faintly of mildew because nobody was checking the drain pans. By month 2, he had installed a woman named Bryn, no last name that anyone could pin down, spelled with a Y because apparently the letter I was for people who weren't visionaries, as our new Director of Culture and Innovation, a title that, as far as I could tell, involved ordering branded hoodies and standing very close to Chase during all-staff meetings. I kept my head down. I have survived 2 recessions. A global pandemic that required me to personally hand-deliver insulin across state lines in my own car because the carriers were grounded, and a ransomware attack that locked us out of every digital manifest for 6 days, during which I ran the entire Western distribution network off a legal pad and a burner phone I bought at a gas station. I figured I could survive Chase. I was wrong about the timeline, but I wasn't wrong about the ending. The friction didn't arrive all at once. It ground in slowly, like grit working its way into a bearing. Chase didn't like me. I was legacy. I was analog. I was a 46-year-old woman in a cardigan who kept paper backups of every temperature log because digital systems fail and dead patients don't accept apologies from a server crash. To him, I was a fossil, taking up square footage that could otherwise house a beanbag chair. To me, he was a hood ornament, shiny, expensive, and about to find out exactly how useless he was the moment something on the road actually went wrong. I remember precisely the day the temperature of the whole office changed, because I remember everything precisely. It's the job. It was a Tuesday in late September. I was elbow deep in a brutal renegotiation with the Pacific Northwest Cold Chain Consortium, a group of independent reefer carriers who move nearly everything we ship above the Oregon border and who negotiate the way longshoremen negotiate, which is to say, without mercy and without small talk. I'd been on the phone for 3.5 hours with their lead rep, a gravel-voiced man everyone just calls Otto, working a 2.2% rate increase down into something that would keep our Pacific Northwest lanes secured for another 4 years without blowing our margins. It was delicate. It mattered. A single percentage point on that contract was worth more than $400,000 a year. Chase strolled past my desk, with Bryn trailing behind him like a scent diffuser. "Dana," he said, not stopping, tossing the word over his shoulder the way you'd flick a piece of lint off a jacket. "We need to talk about your workspace. It's a liability image for the investor walkthrough Friday. Very 1990s. My desk was covered in temperature logs, printed customs declarations, and legal pads full of my own handwriting. The actual living nervous system of a company that moved medicine to sick people. It was not clutter. It was the record of 19 years of nothing going catastrophically wrong. "I'm in the middle of the Pacific Northwest renewal, Chase," I said, covering the receiver with my palm. "If I pack up my desk right now, we lose Oregon and Washington." He stopped. He turned around slowly and gave me the smile people reserve for a confused elderly relative who still writes checks at the grocery store. "We have software for that now, Dana. It's called the cloud. Seriously, lose the paper. It's practically embarrassing." He walked off. Bryn giggled. Otto was still on the line. "Everything okay over there, Dana?" he asked. "Fine, Otto," I said, lighting a mental cigarette, because I quit the real ones 11 years ago, and God, did I want one in that moment. "Just a glitch in the matrix. Now, about that fuel surcharge clause." I saved the deal. I locked in the Pacific Northwest lanes for 4 more years. That contract alone protected roughly $9 million in annual revenue. Did I get a thank you? No. I got a company-wide email about workspace optics with my desk specifically referenced, unnamed but unmistakable, as an example of legacy clutter culture we're working to modernize. But the breaking point was never going to be about work. It never is. It's always the personal disrespect that lights the fuse, and mine got lit in the second week of October. By month 3 of Chase's reign, the dysfunction had a rhythm to it, almost predictable, like weather. He announced a company-wide rebrand, new logo, new tagline, delivering tomorrow today, which nobody in the building could ever say with a straight face. A 6-figure contract with a branding agency in Austin that produced, after 11 weeks and God knows how much money, a font. Just a font. He announced it in an all-hands meeting with the kind of breathless enthusiasm usually reserved for moon landings. Meanwhile, out on the actual floor, things were quietly fraying. He cut the third-party quality assurance contract for our temperature monitoring sensors, the little Bluetooth pucks that ride inside every reefer trailer and log the internal cargo temperature every 90 seconds, because Brin found a cheaper vendor with better branding. The new sensors were, in fact, cheaper. They were also wildly unreliable, throwing false alarms roughly 1 shipment in 6, which meant drivers were constantly pulling over to manually verify temperatures with handheld thermometers, which meant delivery windows started slipping, which meant hospital pharmacy directors started calling me directly, furious, at all hours. I never told Chase how many fires I put out that quarter without his knowledge. There was the Tuesday in August when a load of chemotherapy drugs bound for a children's hospital in Nashville had its sensor throw a false temperature alarm at 2 in the morning on I-40. The driver, a soft-spoken guy named Desmond who'd been hauling for us for 6 years, called me directly instead of dispatch, because dispatch under the new regime took 40 minutes to answer, and he didn't have 40 minutes to spare with sick kids waiting on their medication. Dana, the puck's saying we hit 41 degrees. I don't believe it. Truck feels fine. But I got a hospital waiting on this. I talked him through manually verifying with the handheld probe at 3 different points in the trailer, confirmed the cargo was actually holding at 34 degrees exactly where it should be, walked him through documenting the manual override with photos and timestamps so the delivery would still be defensible if anyone from receiving asked questions, and got him back on the road in under 20 minutes. The chemo drugs made it to Nashville on schedule. Nobody at Meridian Corporate ever knew there had been a problem at all, because I solved it from my bed in my pajamas at 2:15 in the morning and never once mentioned it to a single person above me. That was the job, though. That had always been the job. You don't get a medal for the disaster nobody ever hears about. You get a medal, sometimes, for showing up the next morning and doing it again. Chase, meanwhile, had discovered LinkedIn. He posted constantly thought leadership content about reimagining legacy supply chains for a digital-first world, always accompanied by a photograph of himself standing in the warehouse in a suit, arms crossed, in front of trucks he had personally never once ridden in. The comments were full of other 31-year-olds telling him he was so inspiring and disrupting an outdated industry. I read every single one of those posts because a woman named Sheila in our accounts payable department forwarded them to me religiously, always with the same 3-word commentary. He's not serious. He wasn't. That was the problem. None of it was serious to him, because none of it had ever once cost him anything personally. He had never had to call a hospital pharmacy director at 4 in the morning and explain, voice shaking, that a shipment of insulin had been compromised in transit and there would be a delay. I had made that call exactly once, in year 4 of my career, over a mechanical breakdown nobody could have prevented, and it had taken me a full week to stop replaying the silence on the other end of the line before the director finally, quietly, asked what our contingency plan was. I built an entire contingency network after that call. Backup carriers on retainer in every region, pre-positioned inventory buffers at key hub cities, a direct line to 3 different regional blood and organ transport services who could redirect emergency capacity to us in under 2 hours if we ever needed it. Chase didn't know any of that infrastructure existed. He assumed the truck simply arrived, the way water simply comes out of a faucet, without ever wondering about the pressure system behind the wall. I brought up the sensor reliability issue to him directly exactly once in a scheduled one-on-one that took him 4 reschedules to actually show up for. I laid out the false alarm rate, the driver complaints, the delivery slippage data I'd been tracking quietly in a spreadsheet nobody had asked me to keep. "Dana," he'd said, leaning back in his chair with his hands laced behind his head, "I appreciate the passion, I really do. But I think you're maybe a little too close to the old way of doing things to see the bigger picture here. Bryn ran the numbers. The new vendor saves us $400,000 a year. It'll cost you more than that the first time a hospital audits a delivery and finds out we overrode a false alarm without documentation," I said. "That's a very negative way to look at it," he said. And that was the end of the meeting. I went back to my windowless office and kept my own private log of every override, every manual verification, every disaster averted at 2 in the morning, because some quiet, cynical part of me already knew that someday, somebody was going to need proof that the wheels hadn't fallen off the whole system by accident. The incident that should have gotten Chase fired, if Roger had been paying even the slightest bit of attention that quarter, happened in early September, about 6 weeks before the birthday party invitation ever landed in my inbox. A major national pharmacy chain, one of our 5 largest accounts, worth something in the neighborhood of $200 million a year in shipping volume, had scheduled an executive site visit to evaluate whether to renew their 3-year distribution contract or shift a meaningful chunk of their business to a competitor. It was, in the plainest possible terms, the single most important afternoon of the entire fiscal year. Chase insisted on running the tour personally. He'd prepared for it the way he prepared for everything, which is to say, almost entirely through the lens of aesthetics. He had the warehouse floor repainted the weekend before. He ordered custom Meridian-branded hard hats for the visiting executives, embossed with the new fonts the Austin branding agency had spent 11 weeks producing. He rehearsed a PowerPoint deck full of phrases like synergistic value creation and next-generation fulfillment architecture that meant, as far as I could tell after reading through it once out of morbid curiosity, absolutely nothing at all. What he did not do was check whether the warehouse's temperature-controlled zones were actually functioning correctly, because it had genuinely never once occurred to him that this might matter more to a pharmacy chain executive than the color of the hard hats. I found out 3 days before the visit, entirely by accident, that the newly outsourced HVAC maintenance contractor, Bryn's cost-cutting initiative, naturally, had missed 2 consecutive scheduled inspections on the cold storage compressor units in our main distribution hub. I only found out because a night shift supervisor named Ruben, who didn't officially report to me at all but had my personal cell number saved from a crisis 8 years earlier, texted me a photo of a compressor unit's temperature readout running 4 degrees warmer than spec, with the caption, "This normal? Nobody's checked these in a while in the tours this week." It was not normal. 4 degrees over spec on a compressor serving that particular zone meant we were one more warm afternoon away from an entire section of refrigerated inventory drifting out of FDA-compliant storage range, which would have meant not just failing the client tour spectacularly, but potentially triggering a mandatory quality hold on millions of dollars of product sitting in that exact section of the warehouse. I didn't go to Chase with it. I'd learned by then that going to Chase with a problem meant watching him either dismiss it entirely or, worse, attempt to personally intervene in a way that made everything dramatically worse. Instead, I called the original HVAC contractor directly, the one Bryn had fired for the cheaper option, a guy named Sal who I'd worked with for a decade and who, out of pure loyalty and probably a healthy dose of professional spite toward whoever had replaced him, agreed to come in that same night, off the books, and diagnose the actual problem. It turned out to be a failing compressor relay, a $200 part, installed and tested by 2 a.m, 48 hours before the tour. I never told Chase any of this happened. I never told Roger either, not that it would have mattered by then. The tour went beautifully. The pharmacy executives walked through gleaming, perfectly climate-controlled aisles, admired the new paint job, wore their embossed hard hats, and signed a 3-year contract renewal worth $211 million over its lifetime. Chase took the entire leadership team out to a celebratory dinner that night and, during a toast, credited the successful renewal to a total reimagining of our operational excellence culture. He specifically thanked Bryn by name for her contributions to the visit. He did not mention me once, not because he was being deliberately cruel, but because it had genuinely never crossed his mind that there had been anything to fix in the first place. As far as he knew, nothing had ever been broken. I sat at the far end of that dinner table, nursing a glass of wine I barely touched, watching him raise a toast to a crisis I had personally averted at 2 a.m. with a $200 part and a favor I'd been quietly banking for a decade. And I remember thinking, very clearly, for the first time in 19 years, this is not sustainable. Not the workload. The workload had never scared me. What wasn't sustainable was doing all of it invisibly, forever, for someone who would never once understand what invisible actually meant, or what it cost. I didn't quit that night. I didn't even update my resume. I just filed the memory away, the way I filed everything else, in the same quiet mental drawer where I kept every other unacknowledged rescue, every unspoken thank you I never received, every 2 a.m. phone call nobody upstairs ever knew about. That drawer had been filling up for a while by September. By the time the birthday party invitation landed 6 weeks later, it was already, without my fully realizing it yet, completely full. Peak flu season was ramping up. October is brutal in cold chain pharma. Flu vaccines, RSV shots for infants, the fall push of insulin refills before insurance deductibles reset in January. All of it moving at once through a system with exactly zero slack in it. I was working 12-hour days fueled by ibuprofen, gas station coffee, and pure spite. Then the email landed. Subject line: mandatory attendance, celebrating visionary leadership. It was an invitation to Chase's 32nd birthday. Join us this Saturday evening at the Whitfield family estate for a night of innovation, celebration, and craft cocktails as we honor our CEO, Chase Whitfield, on another trip around the sun. Attendance is mandatory for all senior directors and above. Saturday. The busiest Saturday of the entire quarter. The night a temperature-sensitive shipment of 41 donor corneas and a critical restock of pediatric chemotherapy drugs was scheduled to clear customs at O'Hare before connecting to 11 different children's hospitals across the Midwest. I was the only person in the building who knew how to personally walk that shipment through the airline's cold chain protocol without losing viability. I had done it every single quarter for 6 years. It required live monitoring from the moment the plane touched down until the last cooler was signed for at the last hospital loading dock, sometimes past midnight. I looked at the invitation. It had been printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering. It probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I hit reply. Chase, happy early birthday. Unfortunately, I can't attend Saturday evening. I have the O'Hare cold chain clearance for the pediatric oncology shipment, which requires live monitoring due to the sensitivity of the cargo. Have a drink for me. Best, Dana. Polite, professional, reasonable. I genuinely believed that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, the office felt different. You know that pressure drop right before a tornado touches down? The way the air goes thick and still and everyone's ears pop at once? It felt like that. Phones were quiet in a way phones are never quiet in a distribution center. People glanced at me and then very quickly found something else to look at. I sat down at my desk, booted up my ancient desktop, and took a sip of lukewarm coffee. My login failed. Access denied. Weird, I thought. I typed it again. Access denied. I was reaching for the desk phone to call IT when I heard the click of expensive heels and the squeak of even more expensive loafers coming down the hallway. Dana, Chase's voice booming, no smile in it today. I spun my chair around. There he was, flanked by Bryn holding a clipboard, ironically, and 2 security guards who both looked like they would rather be doing literally anything else on Earth. Is the server down? I asked, though somewhere deep in my gut, right where the ulcer had been quietly forming for 11 months, I already knew the answer. We're making some organizational changes, Chase said, smoothing a bright red silk tie, a power tie on a man with no actual power. We're pivoting toward a more agile leadership culture. Your refusal to engage with the team on a personal level, he paused there, very deliberately not saying the word party, was really the final straw. You're not demonstrating culture fit. I stared at him. The silence stretched out tight as a rubber band about to snap. You're firing me, I said flatly, because I was clearing a shipment of chemo drugs for sick kids instead of watching you drink a $40 old-fashioned. It's about alignment, Bryn chimed in, her voice pitched high and nasal. We need people who vibrate on our frequency. I looked at Bryn. I looked at Chase. I looked at the 2 security guards, both of whom were suddenly very interested in the carpet. Chase, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I am the authorized signatory on contracts with 211 vendors. I am the point of contact for the FDA's Cold Chain Compliance Division, the Port of Los Angeles Pharmaceutical Import Desk, and the Teamsters Local 890 Reefer Division. If I walk out that door, those relationships do not just transfer to a shared drive. Chase laughed. It was a dry, ugly little sound. Everyone is replaceable, Dana. That's business 101. Badge, please. Security will walk you out. I looked down at my desk one last time. The stacks of temperature logs, the sticky notes, the little framed photo of my cat Gravy sitting on top of a filing cabinet like he owned the place. I stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't flip the desk. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my plastic ID badge, and dropped it into Chase's open, waiting hand. Okay, I said. Chase looked almost disappointed. He wanted a scene. He wanted me to beg, to cry, to make him feel like the conquering hero crushing a rebellion. Tell your dad I said good luck, I added, slinging my purse over my shoulder. My dad's in Michigan fishing, Chase sneered. He doesn't care about back office stuff anymore. He will, I said. I picked up the picture of Gravy and I walked out. As the elevator doors closed on Chase's smug, freshly veneered smile, I checked my watch. It was 9:11 a.m. By 9:30, the first refrigerated truck would be pulling into the Kansas City crossdock. By 9:45, the entire Meridian RX distribution network was going to start noticing that the heart had just been cut out of its chest. I wasn't the help. I was the kill switch, and somebody had just pulled the trigger for me. Linda caught me in the stairwell on my way down, because of course she did. Linda had run payroll at Meridian for 26 years, longer even than I'd been there, and she had a sixth sense for disaster that rivaled my own. She was standing on the landing between the third and second floors, arms crossed, looking like she'd sprinted down 2 flights of stairs, which, judging by her breathing, she probably had. They didn't, she said. They did, I said. On what grounds? Culture fit. Linda's face went through about 4 distinct emotional stages in the span of 2 seconds. Disbelief, fury, something that looked almost like grief, and then a hard, flat kind of resolve that I recognized because I'd worn that exact expression myself more times than I could count over 19 years. That's not a real reason, Dana. That's not a legally defensible reason for anything. I know. Are you going to fight it? Unemployment, wrongful term? I'm going to do something better than fight it, Linda, I said. And something in my voice must have carried more weight than I intended, because she went quiet and just looked at me for a long moment. You've got that look, she said finally. What look? The look you got during the ransomware thing. The, I am about to become extremely calm and extremely dangerous look. I almost laughed, right there on the stairwell landing, badge already gone, box of nothing in my hands because I hadn't even bothered to pack anything up. Watch your phone today, Linda. Actually, watch everyone's phones today. And whatever you do, do not let Chase talk you into overriding any payroll authorizations without a second signature, no matter what he tells you about the situation being urgent. Linda's eyes narrowed, and I watched her put together in real time some rough approximation of what was about to happen. She'd worked in finance long enough to know exactly how fragile a company's cash position could look from the inside, and exactly how much of that fragility got quietly papered over every single day by people like me and her, doing jobs nobody upstairs bothered to understand. Dana, she said slowly, what did you do? Nothing yet, I said. I'm about to. She hugged me, quick and fierce, right there on the stairwell, which was not something either of us did ever in 19 years of working 2 floors apart from each other. Whatever it is, she said into my shoulder, I hope it's biblical. It's going to be, Linda, I said. Take care of yourself today. Things are going to get loud. I walked the rest of the way down the stairs and out through the side door instead of the lobby, because I genuinely could not stomach walking past the giant motivational mural Chase had commissioned in month 1, some abstract painting of a compass with the word vision stenciled underneath it in 18-inch letters, paid for, I happened to know from an invoice that had crossed my desk months earlier, at a cost that could have covered 4 months of the janitorial contract he'd cut. Outside, the rain had started in earnest. I texted my sister Marisol, no relation to the executive I'd meet a few hours later, Just a coincidence of names that would strike me as darkly funny later that same day. Got fired this morning. Don't panic, I'm fine. Might need to borrow your lawyer's name for something later. Talk tonight. Her response came back almost instantly. What? Call me right now. Can't yet, I typed back. Busy burning something down. Love you. Talk tonight. Promise. I put the phone in my pocket and walked to my car. The air outside smelled like wet asphalt and somebody's cigarette break 3 doors down. It was a gray Wednesday morning, the kind that gets into your bones a little. But for the first time in almost 2 decades, I didn't feel the chill. I felt light. I crossed the parking lot to my 2017 Honda Accord, which still had a dent in the rear bumper from a loading dock incident I'd personally supervised the cleanup of 4 years earlier. I tossed my purse and the picture of gravy onto the passenger seat, and I didn't start the car right away. I just sat there and listened to the rain tap on the windshield. Most people, fired after 19 years, panic. They do the mortgage math in their head. They worry about COBRA premiums and whether the 401k penalty is worth cashing out early. And sure, a part of me was doing exactly that math. I'm a single woman in my mid-40s, and the job market isn't exactly clamoring for people whose core skill set includes manually reconciling a 2003-era customs manifest. But another part of me, the part that had negotiated with furious truckers, corrupt port inspectors, and hysterical hospital pharmacy directors for 19 straight years, was already sliding into crisis mode. Except this time, I wasn't managing the crisis for Meridian. I was the crisis. I pulled out my personal phone, not the company one. That access had died the second Chase's smirk hit its peak. My personal Gmail, the address I had quietly handed to every major vendor, every union rep, and every regulatory contact over 19 years with the same line every time. This is for real emergencies only. Call me here if the building's on fire. Well, I'd struck the match. Now it was time to watch it burn. I didn't send the mass blast. That's amateur hour, and it looks like sabotage on a forensic timeline. I needed to be compliant. Maliciously, beautifully, boringly compliant. I opened a new draft. Subject: Notice of change in authorized representation. To whom it may concern, effective immediately, I, Dana Reyes, am no longer employed by Meridian RX Distribution. As such, I am no longer the authorized signatory or designated point of contact for any active service agreements, rate contracts, or cold chain compliance verifications on Meridian's behalf. Per Section 9C of our Standard Master Distribution Agreement, Key Personnel Continuity, please be advised that my departure may trigger an automatic review, hold, or suspension of active credit terms and service authorizations pending appointment and verification of a qualified successor. Please direct all future urgent matters to Chase Whitfield, CEO. Best, Dana. I read it over twice. Dry, factual, legally airtight. Section 9C. That was the magic bullet. Years back, when Meridian was expanding fast and its credit rating was shaky, our biggest carriers and brokers got nervous about payment reliability. To calm them down, Roger Whitfield had me draft language into every major contract stating that if key personnel, meaning me, the person who actually held the relationship and vouched for the company's operational integrity, ever left, the vendor had the contractual right to immediately pause services or demand upfront cash payment until new leadership was independently vetted. It was a trust clause. 19 years ago, the vendors weren't trusting Meridian. They were trusting me. Chase had no idea Section 9C existed. Chase probably thought a master distribution agreement was something you signed at a car dealership. I hit send on the first email, then the second, then the third. I went down my contact list alphabetically. Allied Cold Chain Carriers, sent. Baylor Customs Brokerage, sent. Consolidated Reefer Trucking, sent. I sat there in my parked car for 22 minutes, just hitting send. Rhythmic, almost therapeutic, like popping bubble wrap, except every pop cost Meridian somewhere between $80,000 and $200,000 in frozen credit lines. My phone buzzed. Otto, from the Pacific Northwest Cold Chain Consortium. Dana, what in God's name is this email? His voice sounded like gravel tumbling in a dryer. I just got a bounce back from your Meridian address saying user unknown. I'm out, Otto, I said, leaning back in the driver's seat. Chase let me go this morning. Culture fit. Culture fit! Otto barked out a laugh. Does the kid know the ink isn't even dry on the renewal we settled Tuesday? He doesn't seem to think it matters. He thinks the software handles all of it now. Software doesn't buy my guys a case of beer when they're hauling on Christmas Eve, Otto grumbled. So who's signing the cold chain compliance verification for tonight's insulin run to Boise? That would be Chase, I said. Or maybe Bryn. She vibrates on a real high frequency, Otto. I'm sure she can vibrate the paperwork through. Yeah, I heard about her, Otto said flatly. I'm not risking my driver's certifications on some vibes coordinator. If you're not the one signing off, my trucks don't roll. Section 9C, Otto. Section 9C, he confirmed. Trucks are parking. Enjoy your day off, Dana. The line went dead. I smiled. First domino down. I started the car and pulled out of the lot. As I turned onto the main road, I passed a line of Meridian trucks heading inbound. Big white reefer boxes with the blue Meridian Cross logo on the side, gleaming and important looking. The drivers had no idea that within the hour their fuel cards were going to start declining, because the fleet fuel vendor, a guy named Ray who I'd sent a Christmas card to every single year for 11 years, was about to open his email. I didn't go home. I couldn't sit in my apartment and stare at the walls doing nothing, while a company I had personally kept alive through a pandemic started to seize up. I needed a command post. I drove 3 miles to the Ridgeline, a truck stop diner that every driver on the western routes knows by name. Vinyl booths patched with silver duct tape, coffee that tasted faintly of battery acid, eggs cooked in grease that had probably outlived several presidential administrations. It was perfect. I walked in, and the waitress, a woman named Peggy who'd poured me coffee at 2 a.m, more times than either of us could count, nodded at me like she already knew something was up. Coffee, hun? Keep the pot coming, Peggy. And remind me of the Wi-Fi password again? I set up my laptop at a sticky corner table. My phone started buzzing and did not stop. Incoming call, Swift Cold Chain Dispatch. Incoming call, Newark Customs Broker. Incoming call, Chase Whitfield, Meridian. I stared at Chase's name dancing across the screen and let it ring out. He called again immediately. I let that one ring out too. I took a slow sip of the battery acid coffee. It tasted like freedom. I opened a new browser tab. I wasn't finished. I'd notified the vendors. Now I needed to notify the competition. But not yet. That was too aggressive, too soon. First, I needed Chase to sit in the silence of his own phone, not ringing, while every other phone in the building screamed. I checked the clock. 10:52 a.m. At 11, the daily cross-dock status call would normally start, the one I had personally run for 6 years, where I told every regional warehouse manager which trucks were delayed, which loading bays were open, and which shipments needed priority handling. I wondered who was supposed to run it now. I wondered if anyone even remembered it existed on the calendar as anything other than a meeting invite with my name still attached. The diner filled up around me with the regular lunch crowd. Guys named Duke and Ronnie in reflective vests, the clatter of plates and the low rumble of blue-collar gossip. In the middle of all of it, I sat quietly, conducting a symphony of disaster from a table that smelled like maple syrup and diesel. My laptop had a public shipment tracking dashboard pulled up, the same one any customer can access, showing live GPS pings from Meridian's fleet. Red dots meant a truck had been stationary for more than 30 minutes. A cluster of red was already forming outside Kansas City, the Midwest cross-dock hub. The Secure Yards gate code rotated weekly for security compliance, and I was the one who texted the new code to every driver every Monday morning. Today was Wednesday. Nobody had rotated it since I left, because nobody besides me actually knew that the gate had a code at all. Chase probably assumed the gate opened by magic or sheer force of his own charisma. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar 312 area code. Ms. Reyes, this is Devlin, legal counsel for Atlantic Cold Freight. Our trucks are locked out of the Meridian Yard in Elk Grove. Your office is unresponsive. Are we in breach, or is Meridian? I typed back. Mr. Devlin, I'm no longer with Meridian. Please refer to Section 9C of the Master Distribution Agreement. I'm not in a position to authorize entry. Good luck. 3 minutes later, another red dot appeared on the map, this one in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. It was working. The system wasn't breaking. It was freezing, a kind of corporate shock response, the way a body redirects blood to protect the vital organs when something goes catastrophically wrong. The vendors were protecting themselves because the person who had personally guaranteed the reliability of every relationship for 19 years was gone, and nobody had bothered to tell them why, or who was supposed to replace her. Peggy came by with a refill, pouring it with a heavy, generous hand. "You look like you're planning a bank heist, sugar," she said, eyeing my laptop. "Better, Peggy," I said. "I'm auditing one." At 12:40 p.m., my phone rang. Not Chase this time, Bryn. I debated not answering, but curiosity is a vice, and I have always been something of a sinner. "This is Dana," I answered, my voice professional and calm, the voice of a woman who is absolutely not currently watching a $3 billion company implode from a diner table. "Dana," Bryn's voice cracked, half shriek, half sob. "You have to give us the passwords. The insulin trucks are stuck outside Boise and the drivers are calling the state police." "Bryn," I said gently, "I don't have the passwords. They live on the server." "We can't get into the server! It keeps asking for a code sent to your phone." "Ah," I said, "that would be two-factor authentication. Very important for cold chain data integrity." "Well, give me the code!" she screamed. "I can't, Bryn. I'm a private citizen now. Sharing active security credentials with unauthorized personnel after termination is a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I could go to federal prison. You wouldn't want that for me, would you?" There was a stunned, baffled silence on the other end. Then, "Chase says you're holding the company hostage." "Chase fired me, Bryn. Effective immediately. That means my clearance is revoked. If I hand you a security code right now, that's unauthorized computer access. I won't commit a felony for a company I don't work for." "I'm putting you on speaker," she hissed. A beat later, Chase's voice, tight and cracking around the edges, the arrogance leaking panic like a punctured tire. "Dana, stop playing games. Give us the code or I will sue you for corporate sabotage." "Chase," I said, leaning back into the vinyl booth. "You fired me for culture fit. You told me in front of 2 security guards that I was replaceable. Surely your agile new leadership structure can figure out how to reset a password with your own IT provider. We called them. They said the account administrator has to authorize it directly. That's you. Sounds like a flaw in your org chart, I said. I'd suggest calling the provider's emergency line. It's about $5,000 a minute, but they can usually override it in, 24 hours or so. 24 hours? Chase's voice cracked into a shout. We have 300 vials of RSV vaccine sitting in a truck in Boise. It'll spoil! RSV's tricky, I said. Those reefer units need continuous power. Did anyone renew the cold chain fuel cards for the refrigeration compressors? Those expire on the 15th of the month. Today's the 16th. I usually renew that manually because the automated system glitches with our Idaho vendor. I heard a thud on the other end, like a fist hitting a desk. Fix it, Dana. Come back in. Fix it, and maybe we won't sue you. Are you offering me my job back? I asked. I'm offering you a chance not to get destroyed. No thanks, I said. I'm busy. I'm cleaning my apartment. Very important for the vibes. I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. I had just hung up on the CEO of a company that moved medicine to sick people in 41 states. I looked back at the map. More red dots. A cluster in Boise now. A twinge of guilt hit me, not for Chase, but for the vaccines, and for the driver stuck at a gate in the cold with a truckload of medicine slowly warming past its safety window. Those drivers were innocent in all of this. I scrolled my contacts and found the number for Big Tom, the yard foreman at the Boise cold storage facility. I texted him. Tom, it's Dana. I'm out. The kid is driving the bus off a cliff. Fuel cards are about to bounce. Don't let your drivers sit there freezing. Tell them to decouple and plug into shore power at your yard. Charge it to the emergency contingency account. I set it up 4 years ago. It's pre-funded and it's not tied to Chase's authorization. Tom texted back almost instantly. Copy that, Mama Bear. Heard the news already. We got you. Screw the kid. We'll save the vaccines. But we're not releasing those trucks until you personally say so. I smiled. The vaccines were safe. The drivers were safe. Chase was, professionally speaking, cooked. I realized then that I wasn't just unemployed. I was a free agent. And my currency was trust. 19 years of it. And every ounce of it had just walked out the door with me. The calls kept coming in waves, each one a little more frantic than the last, and I answered maybe 1 in 4, just enough to keep the picture clear in my head without letting myself get pulled back into the role of fixer. That instinct dies hard. 19 years of being the person everyone calls when something breaks doesn't just switch off because your badge got confiscated. A customs broker out of Newark, a woman named Priya I'd worked with for a decade, texted instead of calling, which told me she understood the situation faster than most. Dana, heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Also, unrelated, our system is flagging every active Meridian import file for manual review because your digital signature is missing from 3 shipments clearing tonight. Do I even bother explaining Section 9C to whoever calls me from over there, or should I just let it ride? Let it ride, Priya, I typed back. Actually, do me one favor. Don't rush anything on your end. Not maliciously. Just don't rush. Wasn't planning to, she replied, with a little laughing emoji that somehow perfectly captured both of our feelings on the matter. At 1:15, a call came in from a number I recognized as the regional FDA cold chain compliance liaison, a soft-spoken, extremely by-the-book man named Harold, who I had worked with for years on routine audits. Dana, he said, sounding genuinely concerned rather than accusatory. I'm hearing some troubling things about service disruptions at Meridian. Is everything all right on your end? I no longer work there, Harold, I said. As of this morning. A pause. That's concerning timing, given the volume moving through the network right now. I'd agree with that assessment, Harold. For what it's worth, I'd recommend your office keep a close eye on any shipments handled by non-standard carriers over the next few days. I can't speak to what protocols are or aren't being followed without me there to verify them. Understood, he said carefully, in the tone of a man choosing every word with real precision because he already sensed he might need to repeat this conversation to someone else later. Thank you for the heads up, Dana. For what it's worth, you always ran the tightest compliance program I've audited in this region. Whatever happens next, that's not going to be forgotten. That one landed somewhere soft in my chest, and I let myself sit with it for exactly as long as it took to finish my coffee, before moving on to the next fire. At 1:40, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize at all, a local area code. Ms. Reyes? This is Katie Beaumont. I cover the business desk over at the Tribune. I'm hearing some chatter online about disruptions at Meridian RX today, and your name keeps coming up. Do you have a comment? I sat with that for a second, watching Duke and Ronnie 2 booths over arguing loudly about a fantasy football trade. A reporter. That meant this had officially crossed over from an industry problem into a public one. No comment on personnel matters, Katie, I said carefully. I'd suggest reaching out to Meridian's communications team directly for anything related to today's operations. Off the record? Especially off the record, I said, and hung up, because I understood exactly how off the record tended to work in practice, and I had absolutely no interest in becoming a named source in a story that could still, theoretically, end up in a courtroom deposition someday. Peggy refilled my coffee without being asked, sliding into the booth across from me for exactly 30 seconds, the way she did with regulars during a lull. You want the meatloaf special, hun? On the house. You look like you've been going 12 rounds. I could eat, I admitted, and realized I hadn't had anything since the coffee that morning, back when I'd still had a badge and a login and absolutely no idea what kind of day was actually waiting for me. Coming right up, Peggy said, sliding back out of the booth. And Dana, whatever's happening over there, half the drivers who come through here already think you walk on water. Just so you know. I hadn't cried once. Not through the firing, not through the security escort, not through any of the calls. But something about Peggy's flat, matter-of-fact kindness, delivered between a coffee refill and a meatloaf order, nearly did it. I blinked hard, took a breath, and went back to my laptop, because there was still a lot of freight left to move, and grief, if that's even what this was, would have to wait its turn. I closed the laptop. The lunch rush was thinning out. Sitting there was reactive. I needed to be proactive. I thought about who stood to gain the most from Meridian's collapse, and there was really only one answer. Vantage Health Logistics, our biggest national competitor, run by a regional executive named Marisol Cortez, who had been trying to poach me for 6 years running. I'd always said no, out of loyalty to Roger. Loyalty is a two-way street, and Chase had just paved right over it with a $600 cold brew tap. I dialed Marisol's number. She picked up on the second ring. Dana Reyes, she said, her voice smooth and unhurried. What do I owe the pleasure? Did you finally get tired of saving the world for a middle manager's salary? I'm free, Marisol, I said. A pause. A thoughtful, expensive-sounding pause. Free how? Fired this morning. Where are you? The Ridgeline Diner off Route 9. Stay there, she said. I'm sending a car. Let's have lunch and talk about the future. One thing, Marisol. Go ahead. I'm not coming alone. I'm bringing the Pacific Northwest Cold Chain Consortium, the Midwest Reefer Network, and a very personal relationship with the FDA's Cold Chain Compliance Liaison. I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. I'll send the good car, she said. 20 minutes later, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled up outside the ridgeline. It looked like a diamond dropped into a bucket of gravel. The driver, a guy who looked like he moonlighted as security for a nightclub, opened the back door for me. I grabbed my beat-up tote bag and my laptop. Peggy whistled from behind the counter. "Moving up in the world, Dana." "Just a different kind of ride, Peggy," I said, and slid into the back seat. It smelled like new leather and old money. As we glided onto the highway toward downtown, I checked the news on my phone. Nothing on the major networks yet. Pharmaceutical distribution is desperately boring right up until the exact moment it isn't. But the trade blogs were already lighting up. Pharma Logistics Weekly. Meridian RX reports widespread system outage, multiple yards locked down. A smaller industry blog, more direct. Who is Dana Reyes and why are carriers refusing to move for Meridian? I almost laughed. I was trending in the weirdest, nerdiest, most obscure corner of the internet imaginable. I was a celebrity to about 400 logistics professionals in 6 states. My phone buzzed with a voicemail. It was my mother. Linda, our old payroll manager, must have called the prayer circle already. "Dana, honey," my mom's voice quavered on the recording. "Pastor Rick heard you got let go. We're praying for you at Wednesday service. Also, Aunt Carol wants to know if you can still get her that discount on shipping her ceramic garden gnomes from that place in Ohio. Call me back." I rubbed my temples. Even in the middle of a corporate apocalypse, Aunt Carol needed her gnomes. We pulled up outside Meridian, a downtown steakhouse where the waiters wear tuxedos and a bottle of sparkling water costs $11. Marisol Cortez was already seated at a corner table, and she looked like a Bond villain who'd chosen supply chain management over global domination as a career pivot. Impeccably tailored gray suit, silver-streaked hair pulled back tight, eyes that calculated profit margins in real time. "Dana," she said, standing to offer her hand. "You look energized." "I look like I got fired 2 hours ago, Marisol," I said, sitting down. "Let's skip the small talk. You know what's happening." "I do." She nodded, signaling the waiter without looking away from me. "Our dispatch desk is reporting a massive spike in spot market load requests. Meridian freight is getting dumped on the open board. Rates are climbing fast. It's a feeding frenzy out there." "Chase is panicking," I said, unfolding my napkin. "He's trying to cover the loads. He can't move product because he doesn't have drivers willing to touch his freight." "And why is that exactly?" Marisol leaned in. "Unions don't usually walk over a mid-level manager getting let go." "I'm not mid-level, Marisol. I'm the insurance policy. They know that without me personally vouching for the company, the checks might bounce, the customs paperwork won't clear, and the cold chain compliance verifications won't get signed by anyone who actually understands what they're signing. I didn't tell a single vendor to stop working. I just told them I wasn't there to protect them anymore. Self-preservation did the rest." The waiter arrived. I ordered a whiskey, neat. Marisol ordered sparkling water. "So," she said, "what do you want? VP title, corner office? We can match your Meridian salary and add 20%. "I don't want a job, Marisol," I said, meeting her eyes. "I want autonomy." "Explain." "I want to build a standalone division inside Vantage, strategic accounts, cold chain continuity. I bring my book of business, my carrier relationships, my regulatory contacts, 19 years of trust that took me a lifetime to build. I run it my way. No interference from a director of vibes or whatever corporate garnish you've got hanging around your headquarters. I report to you, and only you. If I say a truck moves, it moves. If I say we pay a premium to get a driver home for his kid's birthday, we pay it. No committee meeting required. Marisol tapped a manicured finger on the tablecloth. You're asking for a lot. I'm offering you an empire, I corrected her. Meridian is bleeding out. By tomorrow morning, their biggest customers, major hospital systems, national pharmacy chains, are going to be looking for a lifeboat. I can be that lifeboat, but I steer the ship. She smiled, and it was a predatory smile, but an honest one, and I liked it. Deal in principle, she said. But you'll need to bring the Pacific Northwest and the Port of Long Beach Pharma import desk with you immediately. We've got a backlog and a hospital system in Sacramento that's been begging us for capacity for a year. Done, I said. Draw up the paperwork. While we waited for the check, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You leaked the customs codes. You'll pay for this. It was Chase. Apparently graduating from professional threats to open personal accusations. I texted back. I didn't leak anything. I just didn't renew the two-factor authentication license. It expired at noon. Should have checked the auto-pay. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, but it was a good burn. Then a notification popped up that made my blood run cold. FDA alert. Adverse event report filed. Meridian RX vehicle 2214 involved in multi-vehicle collision, I-70. Temperature excursion suspected. Cargo, pediatric oncology and RSV vaccine shipment. My stomach dropped. That was the O'Hare shipment. The one I was supposed to be personally monitoring that Saturday. The one Chase's birthday party had made sure I wasn't there for. Except this wasn't Saturday. This was Wednesday. And it shouldn't have even been on the road yet. I called Otto immediately. He picked up on the first ring. Dana, tell me you saw it. I saw the alert, Otto. Was it one of your drivers? No, listen. It wasn't one of my guys. It was a scab. Non-certified driver Chase pulled off a random load board an hour ago because we wouldn't touch it. Oh my God, I whispered. Kid didn't have the hazmat or cold chain compliance endorsement, Dana. Took a curve too fast outside Columbus. Jackknifed the rig. Trailer's on its side. Cargo's compromised. Dry ice canisters ruptured, and the whole load's been sitting exposed on the shoulder for 40 minutes already. Is the driver okay? He's alive. Hospital's checking him for a concussion. But Dana, this isn't a delay anymore. This is a federal problem. The FDA's already flagged it. State police called in a hazmat unit for the dry ice. This is going to be a full compliance investigation. I closed my eyes. This was the cost of arrogance. Not just money. Safety. Sick kids waiting on chemotherapy drugs that were now scattered across an Ohio interstate. Half of them ruined. I looked across the table at Marisol. She saw whatever was on my face and set down her water glass. What happened? Meridian just killed itself, I said. Cold chain crash. Uncertified driver, pediatric cancer meds destroyed on a highway shoulder. The FDA's already involved. Marisol whistled low. Their stock is going to zero by market open tomorrow. Chase doesn't just need a lawyer. He needs a priest, I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. Drop the papers. I have to go make sure none of my people get dragged down with this ship. And then I have to have a conversation with a very, very angry man about to land at a private airfield in about 90 minutes. What I didn't mention earlier, sitting in that booth at the ridgeline with my laptop open and the red dots multiplying across the tracking map, was that Marisol wasn't actually the first call I received that afternoon. She was the one I made. The first call I received, at around 11:20, came from a number I recognized immediately because I'd been quietly ignoring calls from it for roughly 3 years. Preston Vance, Regional President of Continental Pharma Freight, our second largest national competitor, and a man whose entire personality, as far as I could tell from a decade of industry conferences, consisted of aggressively firm handshakes and an unshakable belief that he was destined for something bigger than logistics. "Dana Reyes," he said, in the tone of a man who'd clearly been waiting years for an excuse to say my name in exactly that satisfied way. "I'm hearing some very interesting things about Meridian's network today." "News travels fast, Preston." "In this business, it always does. Listen, I don't want to be crass about somebody's bad morning, but I also don't want to be an idiot and let this window close. What would it take to get you sitting across a table from me this afternoon instead of whoever you're currently talking to?" I hadn't yet called Marisol at that point, which meant Preston genuinely had no idea he was already racing against someone. I decided, in the spirit of the day, that a little healthy competition couldn't hurt. "I'm not currently talking to anyone, Preston," I said, which was, in the most literal sense, true for about another 11 minutes. "But I'll tell you what it would take. Full autonomy over a standalone strategic accounts division. My book of business comes with me intact. No reporting layer between me and the board, and I'd need commitments in writing, today, before I'd even consider getting in a car." "Done," Preston said, almost before I'd finished the sentence, which told me everything I needed to know about how much he actually understood the value of what I was offering versus how much he simply wanted to win. "I can have a term sheet to you within the hour." "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up and called Marisol 4 minutes later. The two conversations, laid side by side in my memory, told me almost everything I needed to know about which offer I actually wanted to take. Marisol had asked questions. She'd wanted to understand the mechanics of why the vendors were freezing, whether it was sustainable, what it would actually cost to properly absorb that volume without breaking her own network in the process. Preston had asked nothing. He'd simply said yes to whatever I put in front of him, fast, the way a man says yes when he's more interested in beating a rival to a trophy than in actually understanding what the trophy does. By the time I sat down across from Marisol at the steakhouse, Preston had already texted twice more, the second message reading, with a faint whiff of desperation, "Term sheet's ready whenever you want to see it. Also happy to beat any number Vantage puts in front of you. Just say the word." I showed the text to Marisol, mostly out of a petty desire to watch her reaction, and she read it, snorted once, and slid my phone back across the table without much visible concern. "Preston's been trying to poach half my regional VPs for 2 years," she said. "He wins on speed sometimes. He never wins on retention. His last 4 senior hires all left within 18 months because he promises autonomy and then can't help himself, 6 months in, from micromanaging everything anyway. You'd last 4 months with him before you started building me the exact network I'm about to hire you to build for us instead, except angrier and underpaid." "That's a fairly specific read on a man you clearly don't like," I said. "I have watched him operate for a long time," Marisol said, unbothered. "The offer's the same either way, Dana. You want speed and a big signing check, call Preston back right now, and I genuinely won't hold it against you. You want somewhere you'll actually get to build the thing the way you're describing it? Sign with me. I'm not going to compete on flattery. I'm going to compete on actually meaning what I say." I thought about the 2 calls again. Preston's instant, hungry yes versus Marisol's careful, pointed questions about sustainability. And I already knew, honestly, before she'd even finished making her case, which one I trusted more. I've spent 19 years learning to read the difference between people who want the win and people who want the thing the win is actually made of. Preston wanted a trophy with my name on it. Marisol wanted the network functioning correctly 5 years from now, long after any of this made headlines. I texted Preston back a single line. Appreciate the offer, going a different direction, and watched him respond with 3 increasingly frantic messages over the following 10 minutes, each one raising the number attached to his imaginary term sheet, before I finally just turned my phone face down on the white tablecloth and picked my whiskey back up. Done, I told Marisol. Drop the paperwork. The news of the crash spread faster than anything else had that day, because sick kids and highway wreckage make a much better headline than a corporate outage does. By the time Marisol and I stood up from the steakhouse table, my phone had 31 missed calls and a text from Otto with a single line. It's on the local Columbus news now. They're calling it a hazmat spill. It's not, it's dry ice, but nobody explaining that to the anchor apparently. I called the hospital in Columbus that had been slated to receive the largest share of the pediatric oncology shipment, a place called St. Agnes Children's, because I still had the pharmacy director's direct line memorized after 4 years of coordinating deliveries with her. Her name was Dr. Renata Okafor, and she picked up on the second ring, her voice tight with the particular strain of someone managing a crisis while also trying not to alarm anyone around her. Dana, I heard you're not with Meridian anymore. Is that true? It's true, Dr. Okafor. I'm not calling on their behalf. I'm calling because I know what's on that truck, and I wanted you to hear directly from someone who actually understands the shipment what your options are. We have 4 kids on active protocols who need those specific doses within the next 36 hours, she said. Meridian's emergency line has been unhelpful. Actually, unhelpful is generous. Nobody who's answered the phone seems to understand what's even in the truck. The cargo manifest lists lot numbers CX4471 through CX4483, I said, reading off a printed copy I'd grabbed from the archive facility less than an hour earlier, an old habit of keeping backup paper copies that had never once failed me. Half of that load was in the front section of the trailer, which the state trooper's photos suggest stayed upright and sealed. The dry ice canisters that ruptured were toward the rear. There's a real chance the front section is still viable, but it needs immediate temperature verification by a licensed pharmacist before anyone administers anything from it. You have photos of the accident scene? I have a contact who sent them to me. I'm not authorized to forward internal Meridian material to you, Dr. Okafor. I want to be very clear about that. But I can tell you what I'm seeing and let you make your own calls to the state trooper's office and to the shipper directly. For the next 20 minutes, sitting in the back of Marisol's Escalade while she quietly, respectfully, said nothing and let me work, I walked Dr. Okafor through exactly which lot numbers to prioritize testing, which regional backup supplier could airship replacement doses overnight if the front section turned out to be compromised too, and which specific person at that backup supplier to ask for by name to skip the usual 48-hour new account verification process. It was, technically, none of my business anymore. It was also, in every way that actually mattered, entirely my business. Because 4 kids needed medicine, and I was the only person in the entire chain who still understood how the machine actually worked. Dana, Dr. Okafor said quietly, once we'd worked through the whole plan. Thank you. Genuinely. I don't know what happened over there today, but whatever it was, I'm glad you're still answering your phone. Take care of those kids, Dr. Okafor, I said. That's the whole job. That's always been the whole job. When I hung up, Marisol looked over at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, something more complicated than the calculating shark look she'd worn across the table an hour earlier. You didn't have to do that, she said. You don't work for them anymore. You don't even work for me yet, not officially. I know, I said, looking out the window at the city lights blurring past in the rain. I didn't do it for them. I did it for the kids in the beds. She didn't say anything else about it, but she did reach over and quietly turn her phone so I could see the screen, where she was already drafting an internal memo authorizing an emergency air freight backup order, CCing 3 people I didn't recognize yet, but would within the week. Just in case your backup plan needs backup, she said simply, and went back to typing. 2 hours later, a producer from a national morning show left a voicemail asking if I'd be willing to do a segment about corporate whistleblowing in the pharmaceutical supply chain. I didn't call back. There was a news van parked outside my apartment building when I finally got home that night, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes waiting for it to leave before I risked going inside. This wasn't the kind of story I wanted to be the face of. I wasn't a whistleblower. I hadn't leaked a single document to a single journalist. I had just stopped holding something together with my bare hands and let everyone see, for the first time in 19 years, exactly how much weight had been resting on those hands the entire time. I didn't go straight to the airfield. First, I went to the one place I knew Chase would never think to look, but the people who actually mattered would know exactly where to find me. The archive facility. Not a library, a climate-controlled storage warehouse in an industrial park on the edge of town, where Meridian kept physical copies of every regulatory filing, every signed compliance record dating back to 1991. I had a key. I've always had a key. I needed the original indemnification language Roger Whitfield had signed years ago. The clause that explicitly stated cold chain safety compliance was the sole, non-delegable responsibility of the active, sitting CEO. I needed to prove that when I walked out, the chain of custody broke cleanly, and the negligence that followed, the uncertified driver, the ruined pediatric chemo drugs scattered across an Ohio shoulder, sat 100% on Chase. I was digging through a box labeled 2016 Cold Chain Safety Protocols when the metal roll-up door rattled open behind me. I didn't flinch. I knew exactly who it was. "You're trespassing, Dana." I turned around. Arthur Bellwether, Meridian's general counsel for 22 years, 63 years old, a suit that cost more than my car, eyes that had seen every kind of corporate disaster there was and felt nothing about any of them anymore. "Not trespassing if I still have a key, Arthur," I said, holding up a manila file folder. "And technically, I'm conducting discovery for my own future defense." Arthur sighed and walked in, pulling a handkerchief from his breast pocket to wipe a spot on a dusty filing cabinet before he leaned against it. He looked exhausted in a way I'd never seen on him before. "The FDA's swarming headquarters," he said. "They've frozen the Columbus shipment site and pulled the compliance server logs. Chase is locked in his office and, I mean this literally, crying. Bryn is live streaming an apology video on TikTok. It's genuinely grotesque. He hired an uncertified scab to move a pediatric oncology load, Arthur. What exactly did he expect to happen?" "He expected you to fix it," Arthur said quietly. "He thought you were bluffing." "He never understood that you weren't part of the system, Dana. You were the system." "I didn't break anything, Arthur," I said, my voice hardening. I just stopped holding it together with my own 2 hands." "I know," he said. "That's exactly why I'm here. The board's holding an emergency call tonight. They want to offer you a settlement, a significant one, to come back, talk to the FDA, characterize this as a miscommunication during a leadership transition." I laughed, and it echoed strangely off the metal shelving. "A miscommunication? Arthur, a kid is in the hospital with a concussion. Sick children's chemotherapy is scattered across an interstate. You want me to go under oath and call that a whoopsie?" "We want you to save the company," Arthur said. "I am saving people," I said. "I'm moving them. I've accepted a position with Vantage, Arthur, and I'm taking the good people with me. Every carrier, every broker, every compliance contact who actually keeps sick people alive." Arthur's face fell. He knew exactly what that meant. It was the last nail, and he knew it before I said another word. "Does Roger know?" he asked. "He knows the stock is cratering. He doesn't know why yet. He lands in 90 minutes. I checked the private flight tracker I'd kept bookmarked on my phone for 6 years, ever since I'd once had to reroute Roger's returning flight around a hurricane. I'm going to meet him on the tarmac." "He's going to blame you," Arthur warned. "He's a father before he's a businessman. He'll read this as betrayal." "He can read it however he wants," I said, tucking the file folder into my tote bag. "But he's going to listen to me first." I walked past him toward the door. He didn't try to stop me. "Dana," he called out as I reached it. I paused. "That email, Section 9C. He shook his head slowly. "Brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. It tied every one of our hands legally. We couldn't even threaten the vendors with breach of contract because they were contractually entitled to pause." "Read the fine print, Arthur," I said. I wrote it. I drove to the private airfield on the outskirts of town. The rain had let up, leaving the sky a bruised purple-gray, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's already over. I parked near the small terminal and waited by the fence, watching a white jet with the Whitfield family crest painted small near the tail circle once and touch down. Roger came down the stairs first, in a fishing vest over a button-down, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, looking tanned and rested in a way that made what I was about to do feel almost cruel. Almost. He spotted me by the fence, and his expression shifted from mild curiosity to something colder. "Dana," he said, walking over, "why does my pilot tell me the company stock dropped 11% while we were over Nebraska?" "Get in the car, Roger," I said. "It's a long story, and it starts with a birthday party and your son's ego." He got in without another word, which told me he already understood, somewhere underneath the tan, that this was serious. I pulled out onto the access road. "You destroyed my legacy," he said finally, staring out the window at the flat gray fields. "No, Roger," I said, merging onto the highway. "I just turned the lights on. You're the one who left the kids alone with matches." "Chase told the board you hacked the systems, locked him out on purpose." "Chase doesn't know the difference between a hack and an expired password," I said. "I left. The system followed me out the door. That's not sabotage, Roger. That's gravity." He was quiet for a long stretch, watching the mile markers pass. "The accident," he said eventually, his voice softer, older than I'd ever heard it. "The driver, is he?" "He's alive, but the FDA fines, the state investigation, the recall costs on the destroyed pediatric chemo shipment, that's going to bankrupt whatever liquidity you've got sitting in reserve." "We have reserves." Not enough to cover a gross negligence suit once the FDA figures out your CEO hired a non-certified driver off a random freight app because he'd already alienated every legitimate carrier we work with. He turned to look at me. His eyes were the same cold, calculating blue they'd always been, even now, even exhausted and blindsided. "So what do you want?" he said. "Your job back? A raise? You want me to fire him?" "I don't want my job back, Roger," I said. "I'm done. This ride is a courtesy so you don't hear the rest from a press release." "Hear what?" "That I'm taking the whole supply chain relationship with me to Vantage." The silence in the car went dead quiet, the sound of an era actually ending in real time. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I already did. The Pacific Northwest Consortium signed the transfer authorization 40 minutes ago." He looked like he might genuinely have a stroke right there in my passenger seat. And then, strangely, he slumped back and started to laugh. A dry, wheezing, disbelieving chuckle that went on longer than either of us expected. "Section 9C, he muttered, shaking his head. "I remember when you wrote that clause. I told you it was overkill." "It was insurance," I said, "and you just cashed it in." "I had to," I said quietly, "because you weren't around to." We were approaching headquarters now. Police lights flashed across the parking lot. News vans had already staked out positions on the front lawn. Satellite masts pointed at the sky like some grim harvest. It looks like a crime scene, because in a very real regulatory sense, it was one. "Drop me at the back," Roger said. I drove around to the loading docks, the same docks I'd started my career at 19 years earlier, as a 27-year-old dispatcher with a headset and a legal pad. He opened the door, paused with one foot on the pavement. "Dana," he said. "Yeah, Roger?" "If I fire him, if I actually fire Chase, will you stay?" I looked at the loading dock. I looked at the crumbling concrete edge where I used to eat lunch on my tailgate. I looked at the empire I had built with my own 2 hands, my own blood pressure, my own decade of missed birthdays and canceled vacations. "No," I said. He nodded slowly. He understood. He shut the door and walked toward the chaos, a king walking back into a castle that was already on fire. I put the car in reverse and I didn't watch him go. I had a contract to sign with Marisol Cortez. Somewhere around mile marker 40 on the drive back from the airfield, in the middle of one of the longer silences, I found myself thinking about the winter of my 5th year at Meridian, back when the whole company was still crammed into a single leased warehouse with a leaky roof, and Roger Whitfield still personally signed every paycheck by hand because he didn't trust the direct deposit system yet. We'd lost a load of flu vaccine in a February ice storm that year. An entire tractor-trailer jackknifed on a rural stretch of Highway 20 in Wisconsin. Driver shaken but unhurt. Cargo a total loss. It was, at the time, the single worst thing that had ever happened on my watch. $300,000 of vaccine gone in an instant. And I remember sitting in Roger's cramped little office at 11 at night, genuinely certain I was about to be fired for it, my hands actually shaking as I laid out exactly what had happened and exactly how much it was going to cost the company. Roger had listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, which was unusual for him even then. When I finished, he'd leaned back in his chair, rubbed his eyes, and asked me a single question. "Did the driver do anything wrong?" "No," I'd said. "He did everything right. The ice came out of nowhere. He still lost it." Then it's not your failure, Dana. And it's not his failure either. It's weather. You can't put a clause in a contract that outlaws Wisconsin in February. He'd pulled a bottle of scotch out of his bottom desk drawer, poured 2 glasses without asking if I wanted one, and slid one across the desk to me. The exact same gesture, I realized now, sitting in my car 19 years later, that he'd repeat in that boardroom the night I finally walked away from him for good. "Here's what you're going to do," he'd said back then. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to call every single flu vaccine account we service and tell them the truth before they find out from someone else. You're going to have a recovery plan for each one ready before you make the calls. And then you're going to build something into every future contract so this specific flavor of disaster costs us less the next time it happens. Because it will happen again, in some form, forever. That's the job, Dana. The job isn't preventing disasters. Nobody can do that. The job is making sure the company survives them." That conversation was the reason Section 9C existed at all, I realize now, years and years later, sitting in a rental car outside a burning headquarters. Roger had taught me, in that cramped little office with the leaky roof, exactly how to build armor into a contract so an unpredictable disaster couldn't sink the whole ship. I had simply, eventually, aimed that same armor at him. There was a strange kind of grief in that thought that I hadn't expected to feel, sitting there watching the mile markers go by. I didn't regret what I'd done. I would do every single bit of it again, in the exact same order, without hesitation. But some part of me still missed the version of Roger who'd poured me that first glass of scotch at 11 o'clock at night and treated a $300,000 disaster as an ordinary Tuesday. A man who understood, all the way down in his bones, that the machine only kept running because somebody who actually cared was standing inside it, making sure it did. That man had been gone for a while now, replaced slowly by a wealthier, more distant version of himself who'd started believing his own legend a little too much, who'd handed the keys to a kid who'd never once had to sit up until 11 at night calling pharmacy directors to deliver bad news honestly. I hadn't destroyed that first version of Roger. That version had already quietly disappeared somewhere between the lake house and the fishing boat, long before Chase ever walked into that office in his sandalwood cologne. I had only, finally, stopped protecting the second version from the consequences of what the first version had let happen. I didn't say any of that out loud in the car. Some things you just carry, quietly, and let settle into the same place where you keep every other hard-won piece of the job. The contract with Vantage Health Logistics was thick, 50-some pages of legalese printed on heavy bonded paper. Marisol Cortez sat across from me in her office, which, unlike my old windowless cave, had a floor-to-ceiling view of the entire downtown skyline, including the faint plume of smoke rising, mostly metaphorically, from Meridian's headquarters 3 miles east. "Standard non-compete is waived," Marisol said, tapping a section with a slim silver pen. "We've also added the autonomy clause you requested. You answer to me and the board directly. No middle management layer between you and a decision." I read through it. It was everything I had ever wanted from a job. Respect, real authority, compensation that actually reflected the fact that I hadn't slept a full 8 hours in about 4 years. But as I picked up the pen, I felt a strange, sudden heaviness settle into my chest. I wasn't just signing an offer letter. I was signing a death certificate for the place I'd spent half my adult life keeping alive. "Cold feet?" Marisol asked, watching me closely. "Phantom limb pain," I said. "I spent 19 years building that network, Marisol. It feels strange to help sell it off." "You're not selling it," she said. You're rescuing it. Meridian is radioactive right now. If those carriers and brokers don't move to us, they go under. The small independent trucking outfits, the family-owned brokerages, the pharmacies that depend on reliable delivery for actual patients. They need a host. You're the host. She was right. That was the brutal, unromantic logic of the supply chain. Move or die. I signed. Dana Reyes, Senior Vice President, Strategic Cold Chain Operations. Welcome to the dark side, Marisol said, sliding a glass of champagne across the desk toward me. I prefer to think of it as the winning side, I said, ignoring the glass. Now, can I get a phone? I have work to do. For the next 6 hours, I sat in a leather chair that cost more than my first car and systematically dismantled my old life, one relationship at a time. I called the Port of Long Beach Pharmaceutical Import Desk. Dana, thank God! We've got containers stacked to the ceiling and Meridian isn't answering anything. Route to Vantage, carrier code 771, I said. I'm authorizing the full transfer effective now. You're at Vantage? Okay, switching the manifest routing now. I called the Midwest Reefer Trucking Consortium. Hey boys, it's Dana. I heard about the crash. If you want your invoices actually paid this week, you're going to want to onboard with Vantage. I'm fast-tracking the vendor setup personally. Tonight. We're with you, Dana. Just tell us where to point the trucks. It was a landslide. A mass migration in real time. By 8 that evening, I had personally moved 62% of Meridian's active shipping volume over to Vantage. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda, our old payroll manager. Dana, it's a bloodbath here. Roger fired Chase. Security walked him out personally. He was crying, Dana. Actually crying. Roger's sitting alone in the boardroom. He looks 100 years old. He's asking for you. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Chase was gone. The witch was dead. But the house had already burned down around him. Marisol, I said, standing up. I need to step out for an hour. You just started, she said, frowning slightly. I need to close a loop, I said. I'll be back before midnight. I drove back to Meridian. The news vans had cleared out, but the police tape was still strung across the section of the lot near the loading docks where the FDA inspectors had been photographing the recalled shipment coolers earlier. The building was dark except for the top floor, the executive suite, still lit, glowing like the last room in a house nobody wants to enter. My badge obviously didn't work anymore. I buzzed the intercom. Security, a tired voice answered. It's Dana, I said. There was a long pause, then the buzzer sounded and the door unlocked. I walked through the lobby. It was empty, a ghost town. The employee of the quarter plaque near the elevator bank still had Bryn's headshot on it, smiling with unearned confidence. I resisted the urge to rip it off the wall. I took the elevator up. The executive floor was silent. I walked past Chase's office, the door hanging open, papers scattered across the floor, a broken decorative vase, the sharp, acidic smell of spilled kombucha soaking into the rug. It smelled like failure, specifically, expensively branded failure. I walked toward the boardroom. Roger Whitfield sat alone at the head of the long mahogany table, a bottle of scotch open in front of him, 2 glasses already poured. He looked up when I entered. He looked shrunken, defeated in a way I'd genuinely never seen on him, not through 2 recessions, not through anything. You took them all, he said. It wasn't a question. I took the ones who wanted to survive, I said, staying on my feet. Vantage stock is up 8% in after-hours trading, he muttered. Meridian's halted, trading suspended pending review. I fired him, Roger said. Chase. Disinherited him from the operating trust this afternoon. He's gone. That's something, Roger, but it's about a day late. I know. He slammed his open hand flat on the table. I know that! He's my son! He's an idiot, Roger, and you knew it. But you let him play CEO because you wanted a legacy handed off cleanly. I gestured at the empty boardroom, the dark hallway behind me. Is this it? Is this the legacy? No, I said before he could answer. I am. I trained the people who actually run this operation. I wrote the contracts that made vendors trust this company enough to extend it credit when it was young and shaky. I built every one of those relationships with my own hands over 19 years. You provided the capital, Roger. I provided the competence. And when you let that competence walk out the door on a Wednesday morning over a birthday party, you forfeited any claim to the legacy. He stared at me for a long moment, then slid one of the scotch glasses down the table. It stopped precisely at the edge in front of me. I offered you the COO position once, he said quietly. 2 years ago. You said no, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life fixing other people's mistakes anymore, Roger. I want to build something with Marisol Cortez. He sneered at the name. She's a shark. She's a shark who knows better than to bite the hand that feeds her the actual logistics network, I said, picking up the glass. I came back tonight to tell you one thing. Linda in payroll, the warehouse crews, the dispatchers who showed up every single day and never once got a thank you email. Don't screw them on their severance. If I hear that a single paycheck bounces, I will personally poach every remaining employee you have left and leave you with nothing in this building but the copper wire in the walls. Roger looked at me for a long moment, and something flickered behind his eyes. The old fire. The man who'd built 2 delivery vans into a $3 billion company out of pure stubbornness. They'll be paid, he said, in full. Good. I turned to leave. Dana, he said. I stopped, one hand on the doorframe. You were the best I ever had, he said. I know, I said. That's why it's going to cost you so much to have lost me. I walked out. I took the elevator down. I walked to my car in the empty lot, and on the way, I quietly deleted my personal emergency contact list from my old company phone, a phone I no longer had any legal right to be carrying anyway. It didn't matter. Every number was already backed up in the Global Vantage vendor database now. I was done here. Genuinely, completely done. You'd think that after helping topple a $3 billion company in a single afternoon, I'd go home and sleep for a week straight. But adrenaline is a hell of a drug, and I was still wired at nearly 1 a.m. I needed one more thing. One final cherry on top of an already spectacular Sunday of destruction. I knew exactly where Chase would go. Not to Roger's house. He'd been disinherited from the trust and very publicly walked out by security a few hours earlier. Not a hotel. His corporate cards were almost certainly frozen by then. He'd go to the Alcove, a trendy rooftop bar downtown where the local influencer crowd hung out, because Chase needed validation, and he needed an audience. I drove by. Sure enough, his Tesla, the one with the custom CEO1 vanity plate, an actual real thing this man had ordered, was parked illegally in a loading zone out front. I parked across the street and watched through the window. I could see him at the bar, arms waving, talking loudly to a group of visibly bored, visibly unimpressed women. Bryn was there too, but she wasn't standing next to him. She was off in a corner booth, thumbs flying across her phone screen. I pulled out my own phone. I still, somewhat accidentally, had Bryn's Instagram notifications turned on from a follow back months earlier. A new post from @BrynVibes popped up. A selfie, sad-eyed, heavily filtered. Caption: sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life to protect your peace. New chapter starting. #single life. #bossbabe. #not my fault. I laughed out loud in the dark car. She dumped him. The ship hadn't even fully sunk yet, and the rats were already posting about it publicly. Inside, Chase was visibly unraveling. He grabbed a woman's arm at the bar. She yanked it away sharply. A bouncer stepped between them. It was pathetic to watch, honestly. He wasn't a titan of pharmaceutical distribution. He was just a drunk kid with a canceled black card and a spray tan. I decided not to go inside. I didn't need to rub it in. Watching him get gently escorted out by a bouncer felt satisfying enough on its own. But then my phone rang, Linda again. "Dana," she whispered, "you need to see the company-wide email Chase just sent. He must have bypassed the server lockout somehow before Roger fired him. I don't have access anymore. Forwarding it to your Gmail. Read it." I opened it. From Chase Whitfield, CEO, to all staff. Subject: the truth. You all think Dana is some kind of hero. She's a traitor. She stole our clients. She sabotaged the servers. She's a bitter, middle-aged woman who couldn't handle a new vision for this company. I am the victim here. My father is senile and out of touch. I am the future of this industry. It was a manifesto of pure, unfiltered madness, rambling, riddled with typos, half of it in aggressive all caps. And at the very bottom, an attachment. vibes_dept_budget_final.xlsx. He'd accidentally attached the wrong file. Bryn's department budget instead of whatever imaginary evidence he thought he had against me. I opened the spreadsheet out of pure morbid curiosity. It wasn't a department budget. It was a running ledger of consulting fees paid out to a series of shell LLCs for executive wellness retreats, brand aesthetic consulting, and this was the part that made my stomach turn. Recurring monthly transfers labeled administrative fee, employee retirement trust rebalancing. I clicked into the tab labeled Q3 sourcing. The transfers were coming directly out of Meridian's employee pension fund. This wasn't incompetence anymore. This was a felony. I forwarded the entire email chain, attachment included, to Arthur Bellwether. Subject: FYI. Body: you might want to call the FBI before they call you. 10 minutes later, blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror. They weren't for me. 2 police cruisers pulled up sharply outside the alcove. Officers went in. A few minutes later, they came back out, escorting Chase between them, hands cuffed behind his back, screaming something I could half hear through my cracked window. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm the CEO of a Fortune 500 company." I watched them fold him into the back of the cruiser. "No, Chase," I whispered to the empty car. "You're a liability." I put the car in drive. It was truly, finally over. After I watched the cruiser pull away with Chase folded into the back seat, still shouting through the window about who he was, I sat in my parked car outside the alcove for a long time without moving, just listening to the rain start up again, soft against the windshield. My phone buzzed. My sister, Marisol, finally catching me at a moment I could actually answer. "Okay," she said. No hello, straight into it the way we'd talked to each other our whole lives. "You've been posting cryptic things to me all day about burning things down, and now Mom says Pastor Rick brought you up in the prayer circle, and I need you to actually tell me what is happening." I laughed. A real laugh. The first one all day that didn't have an edge of adrenaline underneath it. "I got fired this morning for missing a company birthday party. By tonight, I'd triggered a contract clause that froze the whole distribution network, moved 60% of the business to a competitor, and just watched my old boss's son get arrested for embezzling from the employee pension fund." There was a long pause on the other end. "That's a lot for one Wednesday." It really was. "Are you okay?" I thought about that question honestly for a second, turning it over before I answered. "I think so. I think I'm more okay than I've been in about 4 years, actually, which is a weird thing to feel on a day this insane." "You always said that place was going to kill you eventually, working yourself into the ground for people who didn't even know your last name." "Chase knew my last name," I said. "He just decided it wasn't worth learning what it stood for." "What happens to the pension thing? The employees who got stolen from?" "I'm working on it," I said. And I meant it, even though at that exact point in the evening, I still didn't fully know what working on it was actually going to require of me. There are people at that company who spent 30 years doing an honest, invisible job so that other people's medicine showed up on time. I'm not going to let some kid's ego and some shell company scheme wipe out what they're owed. "That sounds like the version of you Grandpa Reyes always talked about," my sister said quietly. "The one who used to organize the neighborhood kids' bake sale accounting when we were like 9, remember? You made a spreadsheet. You were 9. "I remember," I said, smiling despite myself in the dark, empty parking lot. "For what it's worth," she said, "whatever you did today, it sounds like exactly the right thing, even if it's also completely insane. I'm proud of you. Also, I need you to call Mom before she has Pastor Rick doing a full healing service on your behalf this Sunday." "I'll call her," I promised. "Love you. Go to bed. I'm fine." "You're never fine. You're just very good at handling things," my sister said. "There's a difference. Get some sleep if you can." I hung up and sat there a moment longer, watching the rain streak sideways across the windshield in the wind, thinking about 9-year-old me with a bake sale ledger, thinking about the version of the job nobody had ever actually asked me to do but that I had done anyway, every single day, for 19 years, because somebody had to, and it had simply always seemed to be me. I started the car and drove home, already half composing the pension fund conversation I knew was coming, even before Roger's call actually arrived a couple of hours later to make it real. I drove home. My apartment was quiet. Gravy, my orange tabby, greeted me at the door with the kind of indifferent, wide-eyed stare only a cat can produce, utterly oblivious to the fact that his owner had just personally decapitated a $3 billion corporate dynasty in the span of a single business day. I sat down on the couch. The TV stayed off. I poured myself a glass of cheap red wine, not the good stuff Marisol had offered me earlier, and let my shoulders finally drop for the first time since 9/11 that morning. My phone rang. Roger. "He's in county lockup," he said, his voice sounding like broken glass being swept into a dustpan. "I saw," I said. "Embezzlement. Arthur says it's in the millions. He... Roger's voice caught. "He was pulling from the pension fund, Dana. The actual retirement fund." That landed differently than I expected it to. The pension fund. The money set aside for guys like Otto's drivers, for Big Tom's crew in Boise, for Peggy's husband, who I happened to know had driven a Meridian route for 11 years before his knees gave out. "Fix it, Roger," I said, my voice flat, my brain still half in that dark boardroom. "I can't," he said. "The accounts are frozen pending the federal investigation, and even once they're unfrozen, the fines alone will wipe out most of what's left. If the pension's gone, Dana, these people have nothing. 30 years of some of these guys' work, gone." I closed my eyes. I had wanted to destroy Chase. I had never wanted to destroy the drivers, the dock crews, the dispatchers who had nothing to do with any of it. "Dana," Roger pleaded, his voice raw in a way I'd genuinely never heard from him. "You have the contracts. You have the leverage now. You're with Vantage. Could you structure something so Vantage absorbs the pension liability as part of an asset purchase?" It was an enormous ask. It would cost Vantage millions upfront. Marisol would hate it on paper. It made almost no traditional business sense. But then I thought about Otto and the guys who drove through blizzards because they owed me a favor from 2019. I thought about Big Tom keeping insulin cold out of loyalty alone. No company behind him, just trust in a person. "I can try," I said slowly. "But it's going to cost you everything, Roger. You sell the entire Meridian brand, assets, contracts, and all remaining liabilities to Vantage for $1. We take the fleet, we take the warehouses, we absorb the pension fund, and you walk away completely. You retire to that lake house permanently, and you never come back into this industry again." "You want me to sell my life's work for $1? It's worth less than $1 right now, Roger. It's negative equity with a federal investigation attached to it. I'm offering you a clean exit before this gets any uglier." There was a long silence on the line. "Do it," he said finally. I hung up. I called Marisol. It was almost 11 at night. "Dana, change of plans." "I'm listening." "We're not just poaching the clients anymore, Marisol. We're buying the whole company." "For how much?" $1. "And the catch?" "We assume the full pension fund liability." "Dana, that's sentimental. That's not sound business." "It's great business, Marisol. We get the entire fleet. We get every warehouse lease. We get every driver, loyal drivers who will know permanently that we're the ones who personally saved their retirement when the old regime tried to steal it. You want real loyalty in this industry? You buy it once, and it lasts forever." Marisol went quiet on the other end. I could practically hear her running the numbers. "You're a shark," she said finally. "A sentimental shark," I agreed. "But fine, draft it." I leaned back into the couch cushions. I had done it. I had dismantled the king, sent the prince to county lockup, and inherited the kingdom. And I had saved the peasants in the process. I took a slow sip of the cheap wine. It didn't taste like victory, exactly. It tasted like pure exhaustion. But it was, without question, the best glass of wine I had ever had in my life. The 3 weeks between signing the $1 asset purchase agreement and settling into the glass-walled office overlooking the harbor were, without question, the strangest and most exhausting stretch of my entire career, and that's a genuinely high bar given everything that had come before it. The federal investigation into Chase moved fast once the pension fund documentation surfaced. Faster than anyone at Meridian, including Arthur Bellwether, seemed to expect. Forensic accountants descended on the shell company records within days, tracing a pattern that turned out to be even uglier than the single spreadsheet I'd stumbled onto by accident. Nearly 4 years of siphoned consulting fees funneled through no fewer than 6 different LLCs, most of them registered to addresses that turned out to be UPS mailboxes in strip malls. Bryn's cooperation with prosecutors, once it became clear her own legal exposure was real, produced a paper trail that made the whole thing airtight faster than anyone expected. She'd apparently kept detailed personal notes, ostensibly for brand journaling purposes, that ended up being some of the most damning evidence in the entire case. Meanwhile, the actual mechanical work of migrating an entire national pharmaceutical distribution network from one company to another in under a month turned out to be its own special kind of chaos, the kind I understood intimately and, honestly, thrived inside of. Every hospital pharmacy contract needed to be individually re-executed. Every DEA controlled substance license needed re-verification under the new corporate entity. Every one of the 400 and some carrier relationships needed a fresh master service agreement, most of which I personally rewrote from scratch over 18-hour days, armed with a legal team from Vantage that initially bristled at my insistence on keeping physical backup binders of every signed document and eventually, grudgingly, admitted the redundancy had saved us twice already when a cloud sync briefly failed during week 2. I hired Linda away from what remained of Meridian's skeleton crew within the first week, offering her a title and salary bump that made her cry actual tears over the phone. I brought over Otto's entire Pacific Northwest team formally, no longer just informally loyal, but contractually, gratefully anchored to Vantage. I personally called Big Tom in Boise, Desmond, who drove the Nashville chemo route, and a dozen other drivers I'd built relationships with over years. Not to recruit them exactly, since most of their existing carrier companies came over automatically as part of the broader migration, but just to tell them, one by one, that the new arrangement would hold, that the trust they'd extended me for years hadn't been misplaced. Marisol gave me almost total latitude to rebuild the operation exactly the way I wanted it, which meant, among other things, that I insisted on reinstating the reliable temperature sensor vendor Chase had cut, at a cost premium Marisol initially raised an eyebrow at, until I walked her through the false alarm data I'd been quietly tracking for over a year. "You kept a spreadsheet nobody asked you to keep," she said, scrolling through 18 months of documented near misses, "specifically so you'd have this exact conversation someday." "I kept a lot of spreadsheets nobody asked me to keep," I told her. "That's most of the job, actually, the part nobody sees." By the time my new office was finished, glass walls, a harbor view, 3 monitors instead of one ancient desktop that used to freeze if you opened more than 4 browser tabs, I had personally onboarded 90% of Meridian's former vendor network, rehired 6 of my old colleagues, including Linda, and negotiated new master agreements that were, by any objective measure, better for every single carrier and broker involved than anything Meridian had offered in years. It didn't feel like triumph exactly. It felt more like finally getting to build the thing I'd been quietly holding together with duct tape and personal favors for 19 years. Except this time with an actual budget, an actual mandate, and nobody standing over my shoulder asking why my desk had too much paper on it. About 10 days after the acquisition closed, I got a formal request to sit for an interview with the FDA's Regional Compliance Office regarding the Columbus crash. Not as a suspect, my new Vantage lawyer assured me repeatedly, but as a material witness with direct knowledge of Meridian's cold chain safety protocols prior to the incident. I drove to a nondescript federal building downtown on a Tuesday morning, wearing the most conservative blazer I owned, and sat across a conference table from 2 investigators, Harold from the Compliance Liaison Office and a younger, sharper woman named Agent Priscilla Ford from the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations, whose presence in the room told me this had officially escalated well past a routine safety review. They asked me to walk them through, in detail, the standard certification process for any driver hauling temperature-sensitive pharmaceutical or hazardous cargo. I explained the layered system I'd built over years. A driver needed both a hazmat endorsement on their commercial license and a separate internal cold chain certification specific to Meridian's own training program. A 2-day course covering everything from manual temperature verification to emergency spill containment procedures. I explained that the internal certification database was maintained separately from the general dispatch system, specifically so that no load could be assigned to an uncertified driver without triggering a hard system block requiring manager override. And who had the authority to issue that kind of override? Agent Ford asked, pen already moving across her legal pad before I'd even finished answering. Historically, 3 people, I said. Myself, the head of safety compliance, and the acting CEO, as a fail-safe for genuine emergencies. It was meant for situations like a certified driver having a medical emergency mid-route and needing an immediate qualified replacement, not for routine dispatch. Do you know who issued the override for the driver involved in the Columbus incident? I did know, because Otto had told me the moment it happened, but I answered carefully anyway, the way 19 years of contract negotiations had trained me to answer anything that might eventually be read back to me in a courtroom. Based on what I've been told secondhand by carriers I still maintain relationships with, the override that day was issued by Chase Whitfield directly, approximately 90 minutes after my own termination that same morning. Was that override consistent with the safety protocols you designed? No, I said. It was explicitly against them. The protocol requires the overriding party to personally verify at minimum that the substitute driver holds a valid hazmat endorsement. The driver assigned to that load, from what I understand, was sourced through a general freight matching app with no cold chain or hazmat credentials on file at all. Agent Ford looked up from her legal pad for the first time in several minutes. In your professional opinion, Ms. Reyes, was that override an isolated lapse or part of a broader pattern? I thought about the compressor units Brin's cost-cutting had left unmaintained for 2 missed inspection cycles. I thought about the unreliable temperature sensors that had been quietly generating false alarms for months while I patched around them at 2 a.m, unpaid and unacknowledged. I thought about 11 weeks and an unknown but substantial sum of company money spent on a font, while third-shift janitorial staff got cut entirely and the bathrooms backed up within 48 hours. In my professional opinion, I said carefully, Meridian's safety infrastructure had been systematically underfunded and deprioritized relative to marketing and branding initiatives over roughly the prior 10 months, under the incoming CEO's direction. Individual employees, myself included, worked to compensate for those gaps quietly, without escalation, because escalation had proven, in my direct experience, to be ineffective. I would characterize the Columbus incident not as an isolated lapse, but as the first time one of those gaps happened to coincide with a moment when nobody remained in place to quietly compensate for it. Harold, who'd stayed mostly silent up to that point, cleared his throat. For the record, Ms. Reyes has an unusually strong compliance track record. In the 11 years I personally audited Meridian's cold chain program under her direct oversight, we recorded 0 major violations. That changed within roughly 6 weeks of her departure. Agent Ford made a note of that, closed her folder, and thanked me for my time, informing me that my statement would likely be entered as part of the broader case file already building against Chase, alongside the financial evidence from the pension fund investigation. She mentioned, almost as an aside on her way out the door, that federal prosecutors were now looking seriously at combining the safety negligence findings with the embezzlement charges into a single, considerably more serious indictment. I drove back to my new office afterward, feeling strange in a way I hadn't quite expected. Not vindicated exactly, and not guilty either, but something more like the specific, heavy relief of finally saying out loud, in an official record that couldn't be talked over or dismissed with a shrug and a comment about being too close to the old way of doing things. Every single thing I'd spent months quietly absorbing without anyone above me ever once asking whether the absorbing was actually sustainable. Some truths only really land once somebody in a position of formal authority writes them down and asks you to sign your name underneath them. Once the pension fund absorption was finalized and confirmed in writing, about 3 weeks after that first frantic phone call from Roger in his study, I made a point of driving out personally to see Margaret, who everyone at the old Meridian just called Margie, a retired dispatcher who'd worked the overnight desk for close to 30 years before her knees finally gave out and forced her into retirement 2 years earlier. Her husband, a driver named Gene, had hauled Meridian freight for even longer than she'd worked the desk, and the two of them were exactly the kind of people the pension fund had actually been built to protect. Not executives, not anyone whose name ever appeared on an org chart. Just two people who had shown up honestly for decades and trusted that the number on their retirement statement would still mean something by the time they actually needed it. I hadn't planned the visit as any kind of victory lap. I genuinely just needed to see, with my own eyes, that it had actually worked, that the number on somebody's real statement had actually held, rather than trusting it in the abstract the way I'd been forced to trust so much of this whole process over the previous 3 weeks. Margie answered the door in a cardigan, not unlike the ones Chase used to mock me for wearing, and she pulled me into a hug before I'd even finished introducing myself properly, which told me she already knew exactly who I was and roughly what I'd done. "Jean's out back," she said, waving me through the house toward a small, tidy backyard where a man in his late 60s was carefully coiling a garden hose. "Jean! It's her! The one from the news!" Jean straightened up slowly, the way a man does after 30 years of driving does something permanent to a person's spine, and shook my hand with a grip that reminded me a little of Big Tom's at the Carrier dinner months later, before that dinner had even happened yet. "Heard what you did," he said simply. "Heard the kid tried to steal our retirement to pay for his girlfriend's massages or whatever it was." "Something like that," I said. "Heard you fixed it." "I fixed the parts I could fix," I said honestly. "There's a whole federal case still working its way through the system. I can't promise everything gets made right. But the pension itself, your actual retirement account, that part's secure now. Vantage absorbed the full liability as part of the acquisition. It's not going anywhere." Gene nodded slowly, looking down at the coiled hose in his hands for a long moment before he spoke again. 31 years I drove for that company," he said. "Never missed a delivery deadline in 31 years. Not even the year my dad died, and I still ran my route the same week because I didn't want to leave anybody short. You do that for 31 years, you start to figure the company owes you something back eventually. Not a parade. Just the number staying the number. That's all any of us ever asked for." "I know," I said. "That's exactly why I did what I did." Margie brought out iced tea, and the three of us sat on plastic lawn chairs in the small backyard for close to an hour, talking about nothing in particular, mostly Gene's stories about routes he'd driven decades earlier, storms he'd pushed through, the year he'd hauled a load of Christmas trees cross-country and slept exactly 9 hours across 4 days to make the delivery window. It wasn't the kind of conversation that made headlines, and it wasn't the kind of thing anyone would ever put in a business magazine profile with a clever nickname attached to it. But sitting there, drinking iced tea in a stranger's backyard on a warm afternoon, listening to a man who'd given 31 honest years to a company that had very nearly stolen his retirement out from under him without a second thought, I understood something about the whole ordeal more clearly than I had at any point during the actual chaos of that Wednesday. I hadn't done any of it for the magazine profile, or the corner office, or even really for the satisfaction of watching Chase get let out of a bar in handcuffs, though I won't pretend that last part hadn't felt good in the moment. I'd done it for exactly this. An honest man's pension number staying the number it was always supposed to be, so he could sit in his own backyard, decades after his last delivery, and trust that the years he'd given had actually meant something to somebody, even if that somebody had mostly been an invisible woman in a windowless office 2 floors away, quietly making sure the machine kept its promises, even when the people running it had stopped caring whether it did. Before I left, Gene walked me out to my car. "You ever need anything," he said, "and I mean anything, you call Margie's number. Us old drivers, we remember who kept the checks clearing. That's worth more than any contract in my experience." I drove home that evening with the windows down, and for the first time since the whole thing started, I let myself actually feel something close to pride, rather than just exhaustion wearing pride's clothes. 3 weeks later, my new office at Vantage has a glass wall facing the harbor. I can watch the cranes loading containers onto ships from my desk. Some of those containers are still painted Meridian blue underneath, but they've all got a fresh Vantage Health Logistics sticker slapped over the old cross logo. The trade press is calling it the acquisition of the decade. A regional business magazine ran a profile on the whole affair and called me the Iron Lady of Cold Chain. I hate the nickname, genuinely, but I framed the article anyway and mailed a copy to my mother, who now shows it to literally everyone at Pastor Rick's Wednesday service, whether they ask about it or not. Chase is out on bail, awaiting federal trial on multiple counts related to pension fund embezzlement and wire fraud. Rumor through the old Meridian grapevine is that Bryn is cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for limited immunity. She's also, somehow, already launched a wellness podcast titled Surviving Toxic Workplaces, My Journey. I subscribed. It's genuinely one of the funniest things I've ever listened to, and I don't think she understands why. Roger is in Michigan, permanently this time. No phone calls, no board seat, no comeback tour. He sent me a case of wine as a parting gift. I haven't opened a single bottle. Every single driver, dispatcher, and dock worker kept their full pension. Otto sent flowers to my new office, an arrangement so enormous it required 2 guys and a hand truck to get it through the lobby. The card read, "To the boss lady, we roll when you say roll." I sit at my desk most days now, looking at a clean digital dashboard spread across 3 monitors. No loose paper, no sticky notes, just clean, efficient data. My new assistant, a sharp 24-year-old named Marcus who actually knows how to build a pivot table without help, walked in one afternoon with the mail. "Mail call, Dana." He dropped a small stack of envelopes on my desk. I flipped through them, vendor renewal notices, a couple of thank you cards from grateful hospital pharmacy directors, and then a small pale envelope with a return address I recognized immediately, the County Department of Corrections. I opened it. A handwritten letter, the handwriting jagged and rushed. "Dana, you think you won. You're just a cog. You'll always just be a cog. I hope you enjoy your cubicle." I looked up from the letter, out through my glass wall, at the harbor, at the cranes, at the empire I now personally ran. I didn't feel angry reading it. I didn't really feel anything at all. He was a ghost to me now, a glitch I had already patched and moved past. I folded the letter neatly, walked it over to the shredder in the corner of my office, and fed it through. The pale pink paper turned into confetti in under 4 seconds. I walked back to my desk. My phone rang. It was Marisol. "Dana, we've got a situation at the Panama Canal transit lane. A vessel's stuck behind a mechanical failure ahead of it in the queue. We need an alternate routing plan for 6 pharma containers by end of day." I smiled, already pulling up the shipping map on my center monitor. "I'm on it," I said. I put on my headset. The machine was humming again, quietly, steadily. And this time, I was the one holding the wrench. "Let's move some freight," I said out loud. To nobody. To the empty glass-walled office. To the harbor beyond it. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades of doing this job, I didn't need a single cigarette to get through the rest of the afternoon. Thanks for sticking around for this one, Cubicle Warriors. If you made it all the way to the end, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Unless, of course, you happen to be my old boss. In which case, good luck in there. I hear the coffee's worse than mine ever was. The regional business magazine profile that gave me the nickname I still can't stand ran a quote near the end that I've read probably a dozen times since. Mostly because a colleague printed it out and taped it to the break room wall at Vantage without telling me first. Which is exactly the kind of thing Linda would do, and in fact, was exactly the kind of thing Linda did. What Dana Reyes demonstrated, the article read, wasn't sabotage. It was the sudden, visible absence of an invisible structure that had been quietly propping up a multi-billion-dollar operation for nearly 2 decades. In an industry that runs on trust relationships nobody outside of it ever sees, she proved, in the space of a single business day, exactly how much weight one person's word can carry, and exactly how fast an empire can freeze solid the moment that word is withdrawn. I didn't ask for that framing, and honestly, it still makes me a little uncomfortable. Mostly because it leaves out every single one of the drivers, dispatchers, and warehouse crews who made the whole thing work in the first place. I wasn't the empire. I was just the person who happened to be standing at the center of a very large, very quiet web of people who all trusted each other enough to keep the machine running, year after year, without anyone above us ever really understanding how fragile that trust actually was, until the day it got tested. About 2 months into the new job, Vantage held a regional carrier appreciation dinner. The kind of event I would have organized personally at Meridian and then quietly skipped because someone had to actually be watching the dashboard that night. This time, I got to attend the whole thing. Otto showed up in a suit that clearly hadn't been worn since somebody's wedding, looking deeply uncomfortable in it, and made a point of finding me before the appetizers were even served. "You did good, Dana," he said gruffly, which from Otto counted as an extended, heartfelt speech. "Company treats my guys right, pays on time, doesn't ask us to run hazmat with some kid off an app. That's all we ever wanted." Big Tom flew in from Boise for it, which surprised me since Big Tom hated flying more than almost anyone I'd ever met. "Wanted to shake the hand of the boss lady in person," he said, doing exactly that with a grip that nearly took my whole arm off. "Also wanted free steak. Mostly the steak, if I'm honest." Desmond, the driver from the Nashville chemo run all those months back, brought me a photograph he'd apparently been carrying in his glove box since that night. A picture of the hospital receiving dock at St. Agnes Children's, the chemo shipment being carried in on schedule, time-stamped at 6:47 that morning. The morning after the false alarm I'd walked him through at 2 in the morning, without either of us knowing it would end up mattering to anyone but the 2 of us. "Kept this in the truck," he said, a little sheepishly, handing it over. Figured you should have it. Figured maybe not everybody who does a job like yours gets a picture of the part that actually worked. I keep it framed on my desk now, next to the photo of Gravy. It's not a fancy photograph. It's a grainy, poorly lit picture of a loading dock at dawn. But it's the truest trophy I own. The only one that actually shows the part of the job that mattered. Not the boardrooms, not the $1 contracts, not the magazine profile with the nickname I hate. Just medicine, arriving on time for a sick kid who never knew any of our names and never needed to. That's the whole job, really. It always was. It's just that nobody ever sees it until one Wednesday morning, they suddenly do. So, that's the story. If you've made it this far, genuinely, thank you for sitting through the whole mess with me. The birthday party, the frozen supply chain, the dollar contract, all of it. If you liked watching a company slowly, methodically freeze to death over a single business day because one person quietly stopped answering the phone, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling me which part made your jaw drop the hardest, and I'll see you in the next one. Unless, of course, you're my old boss. In which case, I hear the phone lines in county lockup have pretty rough call quality. Good luck with that.